Eddard Stark could not sleep that night. A clammy heat clung to King's Landing even at this late hour, and though the window of his chamber in the Red Keep was thrown open, the air provided no relief. Outside, a pale moon rose above the city, but the moonlight offered him no solace. He was troubled, haunted by the knowledge he had discovered, the truth he had no desire to uncover but could not ignore. All of it weighed heavily on his sense of honor. The pieces had fallen into place in his mind, confirming what Jon Arryn had left behind in whispers. Joffrey Baratheon, heir to the Iron Throne, was no Baratheon at all. Despite the unsettled quiet of the city below, Ned felt as though he could hear the footsteps of fate echo in the corridors outside his door, beckoning him to act. He stood by the open window, a letter crumpled in his fist. The letter held only a few words, a small piece of parchment with Renly Baratheon's seal. Renly had proposed a course of action: remove the Lannisters from power, expose Cersei's children for the false heirs they were, and install a rightful king. Yet the rightful king, in Ned's eyes, was Stannis Baratheon, Robert's elder brother. Duty demanded Ned's allegiance to the lawful line of succession, as that had always been the bedrock of his moral code. Uphold the law, no matter how bitter it might taste. Renly believed otherwise, that the lords would not follow Stannis' stern leadership, and that if Ned were to publicly endorse him, Renly could quickly seize the throne. Either way, war loomed. A short time ago, Ned had intended to confront Cersei Lannister with the truth and give her fair warning to flee with her children, to end the bloodshed before it began. It was, perhaps, foolish mercy, but mercy was something he could not entirely cast aside. No matter how the memory of Robert's laugh or his father's proud face seemed to urge him toward a more decisive solution. In his heart, Ned knew no good would come of allowing Cersei to slip away, but the notion of punishing children for their mother's sins turned his stomach. Still, he had no illusions. The Lannisters would not yield, not peacefully, and they would not hesitate to use deception or bloodshed to maintain their power. The Red Keep itself thrummed with their presence, and guards loyal to the Queen waited around every corner. The night outside was quiet enough that it seemed unnatural for this city, always so full of noise by day and night. They said darkness in King's Landing invited unsavory souls to scuttle out and roam the streets. Thieves, cut purses, and murderers might lurk in the alleyways. But within these palace walls, Ned felt an even greater danger. Lannisters, poisoners, spiders weaving webs. He closed the window, turned around, and placed the letter from Renly on the small table beside him. He was not alone in this knowledge, not anymore. Varys likely knew as well, and Littlefinger, and who knew how many others. The longer Ned delayed, the more precarious his position. He sank into a chair, allowing the memories of his recent meeting with Renly to surface. Renly, usually so merry, had been solemn, almost grave, when discussing his scheme. "They'll kill you," he had said, "if you reveal what you know without an army at your back." Ned had thought himself safe behind Robert's name, Robert's authority. But Robert was gone now. Renly's words hung on him still. Yes, they would kill him and everyone dear to him if it meant preserving Joffrey's claim. Lord Eddard Stark was no fool. The question was, how to act on this knowledge. There came a soft knock at his door. He stiffened. The hour was late, too late for official business. His hand moved to the hilt of his sword, which rested beside his chair. "Who is it?" he called out quietly, mindful not to awaken the rest of the household. "It's me," came a whisper. "Renly." Ned stood, striding across the sparse chamber to unbolt the door and open it. Renly Baratheon slipped in, followed by two men wearing the sigil of House Baratheon on their cloaks. Immediately, Ned's eyes flicked down the hall to see if they were observed. The corridor outside was empty. He shut the door firmly. Renly's voice was hushed. "Lord Stark, the time has come. We must leave tonight. You have to trust me." Ned studied Renly's face in the candlelight. Even in the gloom, it was evident that the younger brother of the late King Robert was brimming with tension. "Leave tonight," Ned repeated. Renly said. "All your instincts tell you to stay here, to confront Cersei with your honor. But you mustn't. I know you, Ned. She'll snap the jaws of the city watch shut around you before you can finish your sentence. I have prepared a fast route out of the city, and I have a few men loyal to me who can see us through." Ned's first thought was of his daughters. Arya and Sansa were within these walls. But Sansa was betrothed to Joffrey, no, betrothed to a lie. Yet how could Ned spirit them away? Renly seemed to read his mind. "I understand your concerns. We will take both your girls. My men can safeguard them as we travel. But, Ned, there's no time to waste. Cersei or Littlefinger will move against you soon, and when they do, it'll be too late." "Your plan is to flee to the Stormlands?" Ned asked. Renly nodded. "Storm's End is mine by birthright. I have loyal bannermen in the region. Once we're there, we will gather our forces. I sent a raven to Mace Tyrell as well, extending an invitation for an alliance. The Tyrells are a proud house, but they have no love for the Lannisters. If we can unite Stark, Baratheon, and Tyrell banners, and then bring Stannis into the fold, we'll have a force too large for the Lannisters to break." Ned felt his chest tighten. He thought of Winterfell, his people in the north, his wife Catelyn, and their other children. His first impulse was that he should ride north to rally his own men. But time was short, and heading north might only fragment their efforts. His mind spun with the possibilities. "We can't just vanish. The Queen will suspect something. Send riders in pursuit." Renly gave a grim smile. "That's why we must move swiftly, under cover of darkness. I do not say this lightly, Lord Stark. We'll need the cunning you learned in the war. I will protect your daughters, I swear it. We can worry about the rest later. But if we don't leave now, everything will be lost." Ned stood still, momentarily torn between duty and caution, between honor and necessity. An older voice within him, maybe the echo of his father, warned him that he was about to do something dangerously close to treason. But treason against whom? This boy King Joffrey, who was no true heir to Robert's throne. His father's voice might have said differently, but then, his father had lost his life for trusting the false King Aerys Targaryen's sense of justice. Perhaps honor had to bend this once, for the sake of truth. If Ned confronted Cersei tomorrow, all might be lost in a single stroke. This new path, as reckless as it seemed, might just save the realm from the horrors of a Lannister stranglehold. He gave a decisive nod. "Gather the girls," he said at last. "We leave tonight." Renly almost sagged with relief. "Good. There are horses stabled in the city. My men know the route. We'll slip out through a postern gate on the western side of the keep. From there, we'll pass into the narrower streets and vanish from sight before any watchers can react." Ned wasted no time. He changed into his traveling clothes, brown breeches, a dark cloak, and strapped on his sword belt. Then he took a moment to scribble a brief note, leaving it in a locked drawer. If anything befell him, perhaps the note would someday find a friend who would act on its contents. Quietly, he roused Sansa and Arya, telling them only that they must come, that it was urgent, that it was for their safety. Arya, at least, seemed excited by the prospect, wide-eyed and brimming with questions. Sansa was more fearful, not understanding why she must leave her betrothed. Ned could only offer them both a father's reassurance, though he could not help feeling his heart break for Sansa's confusion. Even if she was naive about Joffrey, she did not deserve the heartbreak that would follow when the truth came out. At last, with as little noise as possible, they left Ned's chambers and slipped through the darkness. Renly led the way, flanked by his men. They encountered a few guards in the corridors. Some recognized Lord Renly, others Lord Stark, but with simple nods or murmured greetings they passed by. None seemed particularly alert at this hour. Still, each moment made Ned's palms sweat, as if a single whisper might bring the castle's entire guard upon them. But the gods must have been with them that night, for they made it down to the courtyard without incident. Renly's men had prepared a small cart for the Stark girls. Sansa and Arya would ride within, accompanied by Ned, Renly, and a handful of Baratheon soldiers. When the postern gate came into view, an unobtrusive door set in the thick walls of the Red Keep, Ned realized it was too quiet. His pulse hammered. The door stood ajar, unguarded, as if waiting for them to leave. A trap? Or good fortune? They advanced carefully, only to see one guard leaning against the wall, apparently fast asleep. Renly's men moved swiftly and quietly, subduing the guard without rousing him fully. A dagger flashed, and the guard slumped. Ned said nothing, but inside, he felt a pang of guilt at the necessity of taking a life, possibly of a man who had done nothing but his duty. There was no turning back now. They emerged from the red keep onto a narrow street lit by a pale moon. Renly's men guided them through twisting alleys and stinking backways. Mercifully, it seemed the city had no knowledge of their flight. There were a few drunks and sleeping forms under the eaves, but no alarm was raised. Eventually, they came upon a stable near the mud gate, where fresh horses were waiting. Ned helped Sansa and Arya onto their mounts. The Tyrell man to whom Renly had sworn gold to ensure these arrangements stood by with a grim look, wearing the colors of green and gold. The man's presence surprised Ned slightly. Apparently, Renly had already begun forging ties with the powerful House Tyrell, or at least with some of its lesser branches or sworn swords. No one spoke until they cleared the city gates. Renly's men offered bribes to the gate guards, who were more interested in silver than in who might be slipping out during the night. At last, once they were on the King's Road heading south, Ned let out a breath. King's Landing sprawled behind them, a den of secrets and sin they had left in the dark. They were not wholly safe, far from it, but at least they were outside the Lannisters' immediate grasp. As the moonlit miles passed under their horses, no immediate pursuit showed on the horizon, though Ned cast many glances back to ensure they were not followed. They continued well past dawn, riding hard. Sansa was unused to such exertion, and Arya complained little but grew sullen, her eyes flicking to Ned for assurance that this was real, not some bizarre dream. Ned tried to keep his daughters as comfortable as possible, but each mile was a new weight of secrecy upon them. He told them only that they were doing what was best for their family, that soon they would understand. Sansa cried softly, lamenting her lost betrothal, or perhaps the illusions she'd cherished. Arya simply glowered, scanning the road ahead with a mixture of fear and excitement, like a wolf pup sensing a coming storm. Renly did not rest until they reached an old inn off the beaten path, abandoned or out of business. Ned could not be certain. They dismounted, leading the horses into a half-collapsed stable. Renly's men scattered to keep watch. At last, Renly motioned for Ned to join him inside. They entered what might have once been the common room. A few rickety tables remained, dust motes dancing in the sunlight streaming through cracks in the shuttered windows. Renly's eyes were bloodshot from fatigue. "We'll shelter here until nightfall. Then we proceed to Storm's End under cover of darkness, but by a different route than the main King's Road." Ned nodded. He examined Renly's face, that determined set of his jaw, the lines of exhaustion around his eyes. "I must send word to my wife to Winterfell," Ned said. "They'll fear the worst if they hear only rumors. And there will be rumors, wild ones." Renly agreed. "We'll dispatch ravens once we reach Storm's End. I have a means of sending messages that might avoid Lannister intercepts. Until then, we must stay hidden." Ned frowned. "You think they'll already be searching for us?" "I would if I were Cersei," Renly said. "They'll discover your disappearance soon enough, if they haven't already. The city watch might scour the roads, and who knows if they'll try to seal the gates and check travelers. But with any luck, we'll stay a few steps ahead. My men know some backways and lesser-known roads. These same men have served me well for years. We can trust them." Ned offered a thin smile. He wasn't entirely confident in trusting men who were strangers to him, but he had little choice. Better to place his faith in Renly's circle than remain in the capital, surrounded by Lannisters. He told himself that at least Sansa and Arya were safe for the moment. As the day wore on, they rested, dozing on benches or in corners. The girls curled up in a corner together, passing the time in hushed conversation. Renly's men kept watch. Ned drifted in and out of a restless sleep, haunted by thoughts of what might be happening in King's Landing. Would the Lannisters suspect he had fled? Or would they send out men to hunt him down? And what of Littlefinger, who had offered him gold cloaks not long ago? Had that offer been genuine or yet another trap? The only comfort was that they were away, and that each passing hour put more ground between them and the Red Keep. That night, true to his word, Renly had them mount up again and ride along a path that cut away from the King's Road, meandering through small villages, farmland, and sometimes unmarked territory. They avoided the main towns, pausing only to water the horses at streams, making camp in secluded groves or behind rolling hills. The land changed as they traveled south. The air warmed, the trees became denser and greener, and the accents of local farmers shifted. Ned thought of the north, of Winterfell's great courtyard and the Godswood. How foreign and far away it seemed now. Even the sky looked different in the Stormlands, a deeper, darker hue at night. Days blurred into one another, marked by the discomforts of constant travel. Sansa's unhappiness evolved into silent resignation. Arya, though occasionally complaining, mostly practiced balancing on fallen logs at rest stops or insisted on pretend sword fights with sticks, showing more bravery than Ned felt. Renly kept the group moving at a hurried pace, and Ned understood his eagerness. If they could reach Storm's End, they would be behind walls loyal to the Baratheons. There, they could properly plan their next steps, forging alliances, calling banners, and informing the realm that Joffrey was born of incest. That truth sat heavy in Ned's heart, for it would set off a storm of conflict in the Seven Kingdoms. But honesty demanded he speak it. Eventually, they approached Storm's End. From a distance, Ned glimpsed its colossal shape, rising over the horizon like a sentinel. The fortress was an imposing sight. Walls said to be so thick they could withstand the fiercest storms, built ages ago by the might of House Durrandon, and now inherited by the Baratheons. The wind howled along the coast, carrying the taste of salt. Dark clouds loomed overhead, threatening an actual storm, as if the castle itself summoned the weather that gave the region its name. The sea beyond was rough, churning with whitecaps. In that gloom, the castle looked like an ancient guardian. Renly led them up a winding coastal road until they arrived at the gates, flanked by watchtowers of pale stone. Guards hailed them, and Ned noticed the banner of the stag flying overhead. As they entered the courtyard, a wave of relief washed over him. Despite the knowledge that no place was truly safe, Storm's End felt removed from the stifling webs of King's Landing. Baratheon men came to greet them, bowing to Lord Renly. Servants scurried to take the horses. Sansa and Arya were ushered inside, where servants prepared rooms for them. Ned thanked the men quietly, grateful to see his daughters taken somewhere they could finally rest in proper beds. Storm's End had its own majesty, albeit one different from the Red Keep. The keep within was not ostentatious or cunningly wrought with filigree, but it radiated a sense of blunt, stalwart strength. The stones were thick, designed for siege, and the corridors were constructed to resist the howling winds. Tapestries depicting storms and stags lined some walls, giving the castle a sense of House Baratheon's identity. The sea's crash resonated constantly in the background, a deep thunder that grew especially fierce during high tide. Renly conducted Ned to a modest hall, where a long table had been prepared with bread, salt, and wine. Lamps illuminated the space, and the wind occasionally rattled the shutters. A small fire crackled in a hearth to ward off the chill. One by one, the men who had accompanied them from King's Landing filed in, and a few of Renly's household knights joined them. Some parted to remove their travel-worn boots or gather in private corners, while others simply warmed themselves by the fire. When all had assembled, Renly stood at the head of the table. He had changed into fresh clothes bearing the sigil of the crowned stag, trimmed with gold thread. Though exhausted, he appeared resolute, as if wearing the mantle of responsibility for all that was to come. "My lords," he said, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged hall, "we have risked much to arrive here. I must first thank Lord Stark for trusting me enough to flee the city, and to all of you who have borne this journey with vigilance." Ned inclined his head. "We owe you our thanks, Lord Renly. Without your aid, we would not have escaped the Lannisters' claws." Renly nodded. "Now that we are here, Behind the walls of Storm's End, we must act. Our purpose is clear. We know Joffrey Baratheon is not the true son of Robert, but a child of incest by the Queen and her brother Jaime Lannister. The realm must learn this truth. There were grim murmurs around the table. A few of the knights exchanged uneasy glances. One older knight, wearing the colors of House Morrigan, cleared his throat. "Lord, how can we prove such a claim?" Ned stepped forward, feeling the old weight in his chest. "We have records from Jon Arryn's research, as well as Maester Pycelle's records of royal lineage. All Baratheons, for centuries, have had black hair. Robert fathered bastards with black hair. Yet each of the Queen's so-called royal children has golden hair, Lannister hair. As we dig deeper, we discover more suspicious details. And I have seen enough with my own eyes to know that Joffrey looks nothing like Robert. And we have one more ally to consider," Renly added. "My brother Stannis. When he learns of this truth, he will be the rightful heir. But we must be prepared. Stannis is proud and unyielding. He may demand fealty rather than alliances. We should not count on him to easily bend to any proposals but his own. However, if we can show him that House Tyrell and the Starks are ready to back his rightful claim, he might be compelled to unite with us." A hush descended. Ned knew the mention of Stannis invoked a certain dread in men's hearts. Stannis Baratheon was a man of iron will, uncompromising. But he was also just in his own severe way. The question was whether the lords of the Reach or the Stormlands would flock to him. Some might prefer Renly's more amiable nature, but Ned had to trust that the truth would guide them all. "What of Lord Tyrell?" asked one of Renly's knights. "Would House Tyrell not prefer you on the throne, my lord?" Renly allowed a small smile. "Lord Mace Tyrell has a prickly pride, but he loves the glory of alliances and marriages. He may see an opportunity if I were to claim the throne. But we must be careful. We want to avoid a war between Baratheon brothers. If we let ambition supersede the lawful claim, we risk fracturing the realm. We'll need the Tyrells' might either way. Their armies are vast, their coffers deep." Ned heard the subtle shift in Renly's tone. A flicker of ambition lurked behind his eyes. He pressed his lips together. He would not serve a usurper, even if it was the younger Baratheon brother. The rightful succession was Stannis's to claim. If Stannis refused to hear reason, though, what then? Another civil war? The realm had bled enough, first under the Targaryen madness, then under Robert's rebellion. Yet it seemed that they were poised to see more blood spilled in the name of kings. They spent the next hour discussing strategies in hushed tones around the table. Messages must be sent. Covertly or openly, they debated. Would they call upon bannermen immediately, or gather them quietly to avoid alerting the Lannisters? In the end, it was decided that a few ravens would fly out in secret to the more trustworthy lords of the Stormlands, while others would deliver letters to distant houses in the Reach and the Riverlands. Ned insisted that a raven be sent to Catelyn at Riverrun, where she was tending to her ailing father. He needed her to rally the North if war came. More than that, he needed her counsel. Her mind was sharp, and she would know best how to safeguard Winterfell if the realm descended into chaos. Night had grown late by the time the council broke up. Ned asked after his daughters. A servant informed him that Sansa had taken a meal in her room and gone to bed, exhausted from the journey and the emotional turmoil. Arya had apparently devoured her food, asked an avalanche of questions about the castle, and finally settled into a bed with difficulty, restless as always. Ned decided not to disturb them, let them sleep in peace for once. As he stepped outside the great hall and into a sheltered courtyard, the wind battered him with the tang of salt. The sea was a black void in the distance, illuminated faintly by a crescent moon. He turned to find Renly standing next to him, arms folded, gazing out at the roiling waves beyond the castle walls. Ned joined him, letting the wind carry away the tension from the meeting. "All my life, I've lived in my brother's shadow," Renly said quietly. Robert was the warrior, the rebel, the big-hearted man who made everyone love him. Stannis was the dutiful older brother, stern, but gifted in war and strategy. I was always the smiling one, the one who made jokes. People liked me well enough, but no one took me seriously. Now everything has changed." He paused, turning to Ned. "I do not seek to overthrow the rightful king. My brother Stannis is that king now. But I know how stubborn he can be, how unyielding. He'll demand everything on his terms. If we stand by him without question, we might keep the realm together. But if too many lords doubt him, or fear him, or prefer me, it could tear the 7 kingdoms in two. We must handle this carefully." Ned rested a hand on the stone battlement. "Duty is often a hard road. Robert's rebellion was not so long ago. War is costly in lives and in gold. But the truth cannot be ignored. Not when the Lannisters sit the throne with no right to it." Renly nodded, the flicker of torchlight dancing across his features. "We will do what must be done then." He hesitated. "Thank you, Ned, for trusting me, for bringing your family here. I promise you, I will not forget it." Those words carried significance, but Ned felt uneasy being entangled in Baratheon family politics. Still, he had cast his lot now. At the very least, he needed to ensure that the truth about Joffrey came to light and that his daughters were kept safe. After a few more reflective moments, he bid Renly good night and retired to a chamber prepared for him. Morning brought a flurry of activity. Ravensseers scribbled messages. Knights and servants bustled around the castle. Ned found Sansa in the courtyard, her red hair braided neatly, staring out at the sea with wide eyes. "It's so gray," she said softly, as though disappointed it wasn't a crystal blue coastline like in the songs. Ned gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "The narrow sea can be calmer, but here in the Stormlands, the waters are often rough. How are you faring, my sweet girl?" Sansa looked away, uncertain. I don't understand why we had to leave the capital like thieves in the night." Joffrey is not who you think he is," Ned interrupted gently. "I promise you, in time, all will be explained. For now, trust me as your father." She fought back tears, giving a small nod. "Yes, father, I trust you." Still, her eyes were haunted, and Ned regretted the heartbreak she would endure once she learned the full truth of Joffrey's parentage and his treacherous nature. Arya burst into the courtyard, all but colliding with her sister. "Father, look at this place." She waved excitedly at the tall walls and the battered towers. "They say the storms here can shake the stones. Some knight told me that this castle once endured a year-long siege when Stannis defended it against the Tyrells. They tried to starve the castle, but he wouldn't yield." Ned had to smile in spite of himself. "We must ask you to behave, Arya," he said gently, though he was relieved by her resilience. "These are strange days, and you should keep close to Sansa or me until we know what's next." Arya gave him a small grin. "I will, father, but I can explore a little, can't I? The knights said they would show me the battlements, and as long as you stay within these walls," Ned said, pressing a hand on her shoulder. "Be wary." She nodded eagerly, and Sansa, after a moment, followed her sister. Watching them, Ned felt a pang of worry. Both were still just girls, caught in the tides of a war they could not comprehend. He turned away, telling himself that securing their future was all that mattered now. Over the next weeks, Storm's End became a hive of quiet preparation. Lord Renly's bannermen trickled in, some lords arriving with retinues of knights and men-at-arms. The courtyard filled with the sounds of steel on steel as new recruits practiced. Armorers worked late into the night, forging swords, mending chainmail. Provisions arrived, wagons of grain, barrels of salted fish, casks of wine. All of it suggested that Renly anticipated a long campaign, or at least the possibility of one. Yet Ned knew that the Real challenge would come when Stannis arrived or, gods forbid, demanded that Renly renounce any ambitions. No word had come from Dragonstone yet. Ravens had been sent, but Stannis had not replied. Had he already learned of Robert's death and Joffrey's coronation? Undoubtedly. The question was why he remained silent. It was on a chill morning under overcast skies that a rider arrived from Highgarden, bearing the banner of the Tyrell Rose. The man, a herald by the name of Ser Davin, carried a sealed letter for Lord Renly. Renly read it with a guarded expression and then beckoned Ned to join him in a private chamber. The letter lay on a table, bearing Lord Mace Tyrell's official seal. Renly said nothing at first, only handed the parchment to Ned. Ned read the words carefully. Lord Tyrell was polite, even flattering, but the gist of his message was clear. He had heard rumors of the false King Joffrey, and was most disturbed to learn that Queen Cersei's children might not be true Baratheons. However, Mace Tyrell hesitated to commit fully to a cause without more substantial proof or some guarantee of his family's benefit. He asked for assurances that in any conflict to come, the Tyrell name would be properly honored, that alliances of marriage might be forged, that Highgarden would be recognized in the new order. The letter made no mention of Stannis. The subtext read that Mace Tyrell was open to the possibility of Renly ascending the throne if the realm should deem it necessary. Ned exhaled sharply. He offers no direct support, yet does not refuse. Typical of Lord Tyrell. He wants to see which way the wind blows. Renly sighed. Yes, but it's a starting point. If I show him that I have support from the Stormlords and the North, once we hear from your lady wife, he may join us. And if Mace Tyrell marches, his vassals will follow. Tarly, Redwine, the Florence, the Hightowers. That's a mighty host indeed. If we can bring them together, we might avoid a protracted war. March on King's Landing quickly, dethrone the boy, and seat the rightful king. Stannis, Ned reminded him gently. Of course. Renly said it quickly, as if expecting Ned to question him. Though Mace Tyrell might not be so thrilled, Stannis is less personable. But once he's crowned, Tyrell can't very well oppose him if we can present a united front. The important thing is that the Lannisters are removed, and the realm is saved from their corruption. Ned studied Renly's face. He wondered, not for the first time, whether Renly truly meant to put Stannis on the throne or if he secretly dreamed of seizing it for himself. Yet Ned had to concede that Renly was right about one thing. Mace Tyrell's involvement could determine the fate of the war. Without the Tyrells, the Lannisters had a shorter warpath, and they were cunning enough to pick off smaller alliances one by one. Do we reply? Ned asked. I'll pen a response, Renly said, reiterating that we have Lord Stark's support, that we have discovered proof of Joffrey's parentage, and that we are prepared to form lasting alliances with the Reach if they side with us. Ned inclined his head. So be it, but we should be careful not to promise more than we can deliver. A man like Mace Tyrell will ask for half the realm if he thinks he can get it. Renly gave a wry smile. I know. You were close to Robert, so you saw more of the old battles and alliances. Perhaps you can guide me better. Ned allowed a small nod. He felt as though he were drifting toward a web of politics he had once abhorred, but for the sake of the realm, he would do what he must. Within a fortnight, more lords had arrived, some pledging allegiance openly to Renly, some cautioning that they would wait for Stannis' word. Ned found himself conferring with these men in the yard or in quiet corners of Storm's End's halls, offering them glimpses of the evidence about Joffrey. It was no simple matter to prove incest. Often, he had to rely on Robert's bastards as living proof. Each black-haired, a strong Baratheon look. He had arranged for some to be quietly retrieved from King's Landing's outskirts, though it was a delicate operation that required stealth and trust. A handful of men were startled by the idea, but enough saw reason in the repeated pattern to lend credence to Ned's claim. The rumor began to spread, quietly at first, then more boldly. Joffrey was no son of Robert, but the product of Cersei and Jaime's twisted bond. In the corridors of Storm's End, knights whispered. Banners rustled in the wind as more men arrived each day. Ned did not relish it, but with each rumor, more swords turned away from King's Landing. Indeed, some men came with tidings of Lannister outrages. Tywin Lannister mustering forces in the west, the mountain men raiding near the Riverlands. The realm was on the brink. Despite his distaste for war, Ned realized that the time for talk alone would soon pass. One evening, as Ned made his way to his chambers, a page caught him, breathless, and said that Lord Renly required his presence in the Solar immediately. Puzzled, Ned hastened there, finding Renly pacing in the lamplight, holding a sealed letter in his hand. His face was set like stone, and Ned's stomach sank. Had they finally heard from Stannis? Renly turned to face Ned. "A raven arrived from Dragonstone," he said. Ned lifted his chin. "And what says your brother?" Renly glanced at the letter. "He acknowledges that Joffrey is a bastard and that the throne belongs to him. He demands that all Stormlords, including me, bend the knee to him as the rightful king of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men. He says he will root out the Lannisters and punish them for their treason, but he warns that any who do not swear fealty will be considered traitors themselves." Ned listened, unsurprised but uneasy. Stannis's ultimatum was blunt, as expected. "There's no mention of an alliance? No courtesy?" Renly grimaced. "He offers pardons for those who acted in ignorance, but his language is stiff, unwavering. He's calling his own banners from Dragonstone and the Stormlands that remain loyal to him. It's more of an edict than a plea for support. He's not negotiating with me. He's commanding me." Ned sighed. "That is Stannis. He sees the world in black and white. He is the rightful king. We must submit or we are traitors. He would be a just king but not a gentle one. Will you obey, as he demands?" Renly clenched his jaw, turning away. "I've summoned a council of my lords to discuss it. We must decide our next steps carefully. If I bend the knee, I lose face with the men who support me, those who prefer me over Stannis. But if I refuse, we could have Baratheon banners fighting one another, which could only delight the Lannisters." It was a quandary indeed. Ned sympathized. He knew Stannis's cause was just by law, but he also knew how precarious it was to expect the other lords to flock to Stannis's banner when Renly had already made overtures to them, some believing they might place Renly on the throne. The seeds of a second rebellion were sown if they could not find unity. Ned felt the heaviness of it. You must do what is right for the realm. If we allow the Lannisters time to fortify their position, all might be lost. We must avoid an internal Baratheon feud. Renly folded the letter, face impassive. "Help me, Ned. The lords look to you as well. They know you for an honorable man. We can still keep the Stormlands from splitting, but I must present them with a strong front and a feasible path to victory." Ned nodded. "I will speak with them. We shall see if we can persuade them that supporting Stannis is the surest way to end the Lannisters' hold." So began another series of councils, debates, private conversations late into the night. Some of the Stormlords argued that Renly should stand aside for Stannis. Others wanted Renly to claim the throne. The younger brother was more charismatic, more likely to secure a broad base of support in the realm. Ned insisted that the law favored Stannis, and that if the North joined with House Baratheon, they would do so under the true king. But every time Ned pressed that point, some lords merely exchanged guarded looks. They liked Renly, not Stannis, who was known for being humorless and harsh. As these arguments went on, ravens flew in and out of Storm's End, carrying messages across the realm. Ned penned letters to Catelyn, imploring her to secure the North's readiness. Another raven brought word that Robb Stark, Ned's eldest son, was preparing to march south if war truly ignited, though some believed the boy was too young. Mace Tyrell remained non-committal, asking for updates. Tywin Lannister was reported to be marching with a large host, possibly toward Harrenhal or the Riverlands. The realm seemed a tinderbox, ready to erupt in flames. Meanwhile, Ned's daughters tried to adapt to life at Storm's End. Sansa missed the refinement of the capital, ironically enough, while Arya adapted better, enjoying the freedom from the protocols of King's Landing. Ned spent what time he could with them, teaching Arya basic sword movements with wooden blades in a quiet corner of the courtyard, though some disapproved. Sansa did her embroidery in the solar but grew quiet and distant. Still, she had begun to comprehend that Joffrey might be no rightful prince. Ned tried to shield her from the uglier truths, but rumors were unstoppable. At last, Renly called a grand council in the main hall of Storm's End, summoning every lord who had answered his call. The hall was crowded with knights, bannermen, and various counselors. Ned stood at Renly's side, arms folded. The tension in the air was palpable as Renly addressed them all. "My lords," Renly began, his voice echoing, "we stand on the brink of a great war. The boy on the Iron Throne is a false king, born of incest. My brother, Stannis Baratheon, has laid claim to the throne, proclaiming himself the true heir. We have a choice. We can unite under him or we can forge another path. In either case, we must stand against the Lannisters." The hall erupted in scattered shouting. Some lords bellowed their support for Stannis, while others urged Renly to be the king they wanted. Ned listened carefully, occasionally stepping forward to quell the chaos. "Hear me, my lords," he said. "I am Eddard Stark of Winterfell. I served King Robert faithfully and discovered the truth of Joffrey's parentage. The Iron Throne by law should pass to Stannis. Let us not tear the realm apart with brother fighting brother. King Robert's legacy should not be undone by civil strife." Some nodded in agreement, but many cast uneasy glances at Renly, as if waiting to hear him proclaim himself. Renly shifted. He was about to speak when the door to the hall opened and a herald announced new arrivals. Several knights in the livery of House Tarth, leading none other than Ser Courtenay Penrose, Castellan of Storm's End, who had apparently come to attend the council though he was already inside the castle. Confused whispers spread. Then a messenger stepped forward, kneeling before Renly. "My lord," he said breathlessly. "News from the harbor. A ship arrived from Dragonstone. Stannis Baratheon himself has landed outside the gates. He requests an audience." The entire hall fell silent. Stannis was here, in the flesh, at Storm's End. Ned's heart tightened. This meeting would decide the fate of the Baratheon cause. If Stannis and Renly could not reconcile, the realm would indeed shatter. Eyes turned to Renly. He squared his shoulders, then nodded. "Bring him," he said. "We'll speak in the courtyard. Clear it." People scattered in a rush, clearing the great hall. Ned, Renly, and a few chosen knights made their way to the courtyard, where the wind whipped at the banners. The sky threatened rain. Standing near the gates was Stannis Baratheon, clad in dark plate that glinted in the gray light. His banner of the flaming heart over the crowned stag whipped behind him. He was flanked by a small retinue of Dragonstone men, all grim-faced. Stannis himself looked as if he had been carved from granite. Stern eyes, clenched jaw, a near-permanent scowl. Renly approached his older brother slowly, tension crackling in the air. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Stannis's voice cut through the wind. "Renly," he said, as if spitting a bitter morsel from his mouth. "So this is how I find you, raising banners in my own seat, Storm's End, while the false king sits the throne." Renly lifted his chin. "I have not declared myself king, brother, but I have gathered those who oppose Joffrey's claim. I invited you here, if you recall, with letters, though you never replied. I did what needed to be done to oppose the Lannisters." Stannis scoffed. "What needed to be done was to proclaim me king and rally to my cause. I am Robert's heir. By the laws of gods and men, you owe me fealty. Do you mean to dispute it? I mean to see the Lannisters undone, and to ensure the realm does not shatter in the process," Renly said, voice steady. "Many of our bannermen fear your severity. They do not know if you can lead them as Robert did." "Robert is dead," Stannis snapped. "And I am not Robert. I am Stannis, the king of Westeros. If they will not follow me willingly, they will kneel before me or be destroyed. The time for trifling is done." Ned decided to step forward, braving the tension. "Lord Stannis," he said, bowing slightly, "I believe in your claim. Lord Renly has aided my escape from King's Landing so we might expose the Lannisters. We have no desire for civil war among Baratheons." Stannis's gaze fell on Ned, and he gave a curt nod. "Lord Stark, my brother always spoke highly of your honor. If you stand with me, you stand on the side of law. Yet I cannot say the same for my younger brother, who trifles with my bannermen rather than sending them to me." Renly was taut as a drawn bowstring. "Must you see treason in everything I do, brother?" Stannis's lips thinned. "You defied me. That is enough. But I have come here in person, a courtesy I am seldom wont to show, to offer you a chance to bend the knee peacefully. Do so, and I shall pardon your presumption. Together we shall crush the Lannisters. Any other path, and you are my enemy." For a moment, Ned thought Renly would simply kneel, but the younger Baratheon's pride flickered in his eyes. He had the support of many present. If he bowed too quickly, he might lose face with them. "We must talk terms," Renly said carefully. "We have potential allies among the Tyrells and in the Riverlands. If they see that you are too rigid, they might not join us." Stannis straightened, the wind tearing at his cloak. "I do not negotiate the terms of my kingship." The courtyard was silent save for the whipping wind. Ned's pulse hammered. This was precisely the conflict he feared. Stannis's unbending nature versus Renly's ambition. If they parted in anger, civil war was assured, giving the Lannisters time to strengthen. "My lords," Ned said, trying once more, "we all want the same end, the dethronement of the false king. You are both Baratheon's Robert's brothers. Let us find a path that unites your strengths." Stannis's gaze flickered to Ned. "You are the Warden of the North. I thank you for your counsel, Lord Stark, but if my brother insists on turning my own bannermen against me, then he is no better than the Lannisters." Renly bristled. "That is not what I intend, brother. I only seek to ensure that our forces are solid, that they will fight for the rightful cause. But you come here with commands and threats. Give them reason to follow you, beyond the letter of the law." The muscles in Stannis's jaw worked. "Very well. You want words? I offer justice. We will lay siege to King's Landing, tear down the Lannisters' power, and restore order. I will be a just king, punishing criminals, rewarding loyalty. Law will be respected in every corner of the Seven Kingdoms. That is what I offer. Is that not enough?" Renly hesitated. He glanced at Ned, who could see the conflict in his eyes. If Renly refused, men who favored him might stand with him in open rebellion. That would pit brother against brother. Ned prayed to the old gods that Renly would yield for the greater good. The hush stretched. At last, Renly turned to Stannis and lowered himself to one knee, bowing his head. Gasps rippled through the courtyard. Renly's knights looked uncertain, but they did not move to intervene. Stannis watched with a stony expression, as though victory was his right. Renly's voice was quiet but resolute. "I, Renly of House Baratheon, do hereby recognize you, Stannis of House Baratheon, as the lawful king of Westeros, and I pledge my loyalty to you, so long as you hold true to your promise of justice." Ned released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The tension in the courtyard seemed to recede like a wave on the shore, though the mood remained uncertain. Some men scowled or exchanged uneasy looks, having hoped for Renly's crown, but no one openly spoke against the decision. Stannis stepped forward and motioned for Renly to rise, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I accept your fealty," Stannis said. "May you serve me well in the war to come." Renly's eyes flickered as he stood. "We shall see, brother." Without further ceremony, Stannis turned to the assembled knights and lords. "Hear me, storm lords and men of the Reach. I am King Stannis, the first of my name. I call my banners to march against the Lannisters. Together we shall expose Joffrey's parentage to the realm, and we shall restore the rightful Baratheon seat on the Iron Throne. Those who join us will be rewarded. Those who stand against us will be crushed." There was a murmur of assent, though it was hesitant in parts of the crowd. Ned felt a pang of worry that some might still resist following Stannis wholeheartedly, but at least the illusion of unity was established. Now they had a chance to strike quickly, before Tywin Lannister or the Gold Cloaks could reinforce King's Landing too greatly. That night, in the hall, Stannis held a smaller council with Renly, Ned, and a handful of trusted lords. Maps were spread on the table, candles flickering in the gusts. Stannis pored over them, tapping a finger near King's Landing. "If we march within the fortnight, we can reach the city in 2 to 3 weeks' time, depending on the route. The Lannisters will be forced to defend, but Tywin might move from the west, or the boy Robb Stark might be heading south. The realm is in chaos." Ned spoke up. "My son does march, but only if the Lannisters push into the Riverlands. We can coordinate with him, ensure that our forces trap the Lannisters between us, preventing them from relieving King's Landing. If we seize the city, we control the throne and can force the Lannisters to accept terms, or face an unwinnable war. Stannis nodded at Ned. You will write to your son. Then, commanding him to align his armies with ours? Ned stiffened slightly. I will write to him, yes, but I must be sure of your intentions toward the north. My people will not accept further southern meddling. We endured a Targaryen king because Robert was a friend. Many northerners hold old grudges against southerners' ways. Stannis's eyes were cold. I have no quarrel with the north, Lord Stark. You shall remain warden, and your people shall hold their lands and rights as always. But I will be king over all the 7 kingdoms, or I will be no king at all. Ned inclined his head. That will suffice. I will do my part. Renly scanned the map. We must also consider the Tyrells. Mace Tyrell might join us if he's convinced we have the momentum. We should send word that I have recognized you, brother, and that the combined might of the Stormlands and the North is forming. That might be enough to secure Highgarden's armies. Stannis pursed his lips. Do it. The Tyrells are proud, but if we prove we are the winning side, they will see the advantage of supporting us. Let them come if they will. I'll not beg. If they refuse, we will defeat the Lannisters without them. So it was decided. Letters were written, sealed with Stannis's newly minted royal seal. The lords agreed to gather their armies, and messengers were sent out across the Stormlands. Ned wrote a letter to Robb, advising him to coordinate with Stannis's forces, to be cautious of Tywin Lannister's movements, and to remember that their true objective was to remove the Lannisters from power and restore order. Another raven flew to Catelyn, informing her that Stannis and Renly were united, at least formally, and urging her to secure alliances in the Riverlands. Meanwhile, quiet rumors continued to be spread, revealing Joffrey's parentage at every opportunity. Stannis also sent riders to the lords loyal to him on Dragonstone and in the Crownlands, calling them to rally. Within days, Storm's End was alive with the clang of blacksmiths, the bustle of supply wagons, and the drilling of soldiers. Stannis's men, stern and disciplined, mixed with Renly's more flamboyant knights, forging an uneasy alliance. Ned watched from the battlements, troubled by the tension that ran through the camp like a fault line. While Stannis and Renly were no longer openly hostile, the difference in their characters remained. He prayed to the old gods that they would maintain a united front long enough to topple the Lannisters. One early morning, while Ned was breaking his fast on bread and salt fish, a scout arrived from the Kingsroad. The man was haggard, dust covering his cloak, but he reported that Lannister outriders had been spotted moving along the Stormlands borders. They were likely checking to see if Renly had indeed called his banners. Another message came in from one of the Stormlords. A Lannister host under the command of the Queen's cousin was marching east. War was upon them. Stannis ordered immediate preparations for the march. By midday, the courtyard was chaotic. Soldiers assembled in columns. Horses were groomed and saddled. Supply wagons were loaded. Renly and Stannis stood side by side, giving commands. Renly with a charismatic smile for his knights, Stannis with a steely glare that brooked no nonsense. Ned oversaw the loading of personal possessions, ensuring Sansa and Arya would remain behind in Storm's End under a strong guard. He knew they would be safer within these walls than on the battlefield. He knelt before his daughters, explaining that he had to ride with King Stannis, that this was necessary to end the threat of the Lannisters and secure their futures. "You will be safe here," he told them. "I have made arrangements with trusted knights to guard you. If the worst happens, you must find a ship to White Harbor or sail to the Vale, perhaps. But the walls of Storm's End are thick. You will not fall easily." Sansa clutched his hand, tears brimming. "Father, I'm afraid." Arya tried to look brave. "I'm not. I can fight if they come." Ned forced a reassuring smile. "You must obey the knights here. They will protect you. I love you both." He embraced them, his heart heavy. He departed soon after, riding at the head of a column bearing the direwolf of House Stark alongside the crowned stag of House Baratheon. It was a strange alliance, even for him, to ride under a king who was not crowned yet in the eyes of the realm but claimed the throne by law. Yet Ned found some measure of assurance in the knowledge that they were fighting for the truth rather than a lie. Over the next week, they marched through the Stormlands, gathering more men from local lords, until their host swelled to a respectable size, though perhaps not as large as the combined might of the Lannisters and the Reach if it came to that. Scouts ranged ahead, searching for sign of enemy movements. During the long columns of marching, Ned sometimes rode beside Stannis or Renly, offering counsel. Stannis listened impassively, occasionally agreeing, sometimes ignoring him. Renly was more receptive, but tension with his brother simmered just beneath the surface. The army formed a ragged but determined caravan of foot soldiers, mounted knights, supply wagons, and siege engines rumbling along the dusty roads. Men sang old war ballads or prayed to various gods for victory. The Stormlands weather tested them, drenching the baggage train in sudden downpours or buffeting them with gusts of wind. When the sun emerged, the humidity made armor chafe and tempers flare. At night, Ned would sit with a few trusted men around the campfires, quietly discussing strategy. They speculated on the Lannisters' next move, on whether Tywin might try to catch them unawares. They wondered if Mace Tyrell would soon declare for them, bringing tens of thousands of levies from the Reach. And always Ned thought of Catelyn of the North and of his daughters in Storm's End. One evening, as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, Stannis summoned Ned to his command tent. Renly was there as well, standing with folded arms. The tent was lit by lanterns, casting elongated shadows on the canvas walls. A map lay on a wooden table, pinned at the corners. "Our scouts report Lannister forces near Summerhall," Stannis said, gesturing at the map. "I want to avoid a pitched battle before we're closer to the capital. If we can slip by them and take King's Landing quickly, we gain the advantage. The Gold Cloaks might surrender once they see they have no support." Renly frowned. "But if we let them harass our flanks, we might lose a portion of our baggage train. I say we march to meet them directly, show that we're not afraid. A victory on the field would bolster morale and might cause the City Watch to lose faith in the Lannisters." "That's a needless risk," Stannis retorted. "We must strike the capital. Once King's Landing is ours, the Lannisters will be forced to fight on our terms." They glared at each other. Ned cleared his throat softly. "We must weigh both strategies. If the Lannister force near Summerhall is large enough, ignoring them might allow them to attack our rear. But if they're small, perhaps a vanguard could hold them off or misdirect them, while the main host proceeds." Renly and Stannis regarded Ned, then looked at each other. Finally, Stannis gave a curt nod. "We'll form a vanguard to contain the Lannisters and keep them off our main column. Renly, since you're so eager for a display of arms, you'll lead it." Renly's jaw tightened, but he inclined his head. "As you command, Your Grace." Stannis tapped the map. "You'll have 2,000 men. Keep the Lannisters occupied, but do not let yourself be drawn into a larger engagement. We move on the capital. Lord Stark, you'll remain with me in the main column. We need your counsel." Ned nodded, though he felt uneasy. Dividing their forces always carried risk. Still, perhaps a quick skirmish to pin the Lannisters down was a better plan than ignoring them outright. He left the tent, mind swirling with possibilities, uncertain if the seeds of distrust between Stannis and Renly might sprout at the worst moment. And so, as dawn broke next day, the army split. Renly and a contingent of knights and footmen peeled off toward Summerhall, while Stannis led the greater part of the host north toward King's Landing. The roads were rough, the sky overcast. Ned rode alongside Stannis, scanning the horizon for smoke or signs of Lannister outriders. In the distance, crows circled, a bad omen. So began the final approach on King's Landing, with Ned Stark in the midst of a Baratheon army united by fragile threads of honor, ambition, and necessity. The knowledge of Joffrey's true parentage had lit a spark across the realm, and that spark was growing into a conflagration. And all the while, Ned's mind returned again and again to a single question. What if his mercy towards Cersei had doomed them all? Had he done the right thing in sparing her? Honor had demanded it, but war was upon them regardless. Perhaps there was no escaping the storms that would come. He could only press on, for the sake of his family, his people, and the realm he had sworn to protect. Ned Stark rose before dawn on the day their reduced army set out from the fork in the roads. He had passed a restless night, haunted by the recurring dream of the crypts in Winterfell. In the dream, the statues of his forefathers had turned their eyes on him and seemed to whisper questions he could not answer. Accusations that, by acting outside the normal lines of honor, he had set in motion a war that might consume all of Westeros. Then he would wake, heart pounding, feeling as though he had fallen far from the certain ground of his old life. They moved out just as the gray sky began to lighten. Drizzle slicked the roads, and the clouds overhead seemed grudging in their promise of dawn. The main Baratheon column, now King Stannis' column, numbered close to 12,000 men. Less than Renly might have boasted if he'd taken all the Stormlords with him, but enough to present a formidable threat to the capital if they arrived intact and in good order. Stannis' banners rippled in the wind. The crowned stag emblazoned on a field of golden brown, overlaid with the red heart that signified his new devotion to the Lord of Light. For many of the common soldiers, the latter was unsettling. They had heard rumors that Stannis prayed to a foreign god, guided by a red priestess. Yet that priestess was nowhere to be seen. Word had it she remained on Dragonstone or lingered behind the column, awaiting some sign. Only a handful of men spoke of her in hushed tones, but Ned listened warily. He had little appetite for foreign gods or strange rites. War was complicated enough without the meddling of magic. He rode near the head of the column beside King Stannis, as commanded. Men parted before them, knights and crossbowmen marching on foot, horses clopping through the mud. Every so often, Stannis asked a terse question of Ned, some detail about the roads to King's Landing, or the likely disposition of the City Watch. Ned answered as best he could, though he had never commanded an army that besieged the capital. When Robert seized the throne, everything had happened quickly. The rebels converged, the Targaryen heirs fled or died, and Jaime Lannister slew the Mad King before any formal siege began. This time, no madness occupied the Red Keep, only cold cunning, if Cersei Lannister yet ruled in Joffrey's name. Ned thought about her, about the moment he had nearly confronted her with the truth, about the desperate decision to flee instead. Even now, it left a sour taste. He did not regret saving his daughters, but he felt the realm had come to war all the same. No matter how often he told himself that Cersei would have murdered him if he had stayed, he could not entirely banish the sense of guilt. Over the next 2 days, the weather turned foul, shifting from drizzle to pounding rain that transformed the road into sucking mud and forced them to slow. Despite orders to maintain discipline, the baggage train grew stretched along the route, and exhaustion darkened the men's tempers. A handful of small fights broke out among foot soldiers from different houses. Stannis' captains hurried to quell such disputes. Occasionally, Ned dismounted to walk among the men, urging them to remain steadfast. Many recognized him, for stories of the Honorable Lord Stark had traveled across the realm, and a few thanked him for having found the courage to expose the Lannister deceit. The rumor of Joffrey's parentage was well known now. Any soldier who marched beneath Stannis' banners knew precisely why they marched. When the rains finally relented, they made slightly better time, winding past low hills and fields that once provided crops to local stormlords. The land looked weary and waterlogged, with puddles shining under uncertain skies. Scouts returned each evening, bringing more tidings of small Lannister patrols but no major force that might block them. There was, however, one vital question. How strong was King's Landing's defense? Some said that Cersei would have summoned every gold cloak in the city and that Tywin Lannister was on the march from the west. Others claimed the City Watch was rife with bribes, uncertain loyalties, or fear. Ned himself did not know what to believe. He only hoped that the City Watch would not be eager to die for a false king, especially one rumored to be the product of incest. On the 5th evening since they had split from Renly, they made camp in the lee of a low ridge, using the natural slope to shield them from the biting wind off the Blackwater Bay. The sea was only a day's ride to the east now. Ned found little comfort in the damp ground and the restless atmosphere that clung to the camp. Soldiers huddled around fires, cooking meager meals and rubbing their sore feet. Armored knights might have a tent, but the rank and file slept beneath makeshift shelters. The mood was tense, as though the men sensed that a battle approached. If not a true siege, then at least bloodshed. At times Ned recalled the moment before the Battle of the Trident, waiting in the mud with Robert's rebellion forces, knowing the Targaryen army was near. But he had been young then, newly hardened by war's realities. Now he felt every ache in his bones, every regret in his soul. After sharing a quiet meal of salt cod and stale bread, Ned made his way towards Stannis' command pavilion. As he passed between tents, he noticed a pair of guards wearing the crowned stag and heart sigil standing watch, each face blank as stone in the torchlight. They inclined their heads to Ned, letting him inside. The pavilion was spacious but sparsely furnished. A single table with maps and parchments dominated the space, and behind it stood King Stannis, flanked by a few of his captains. Lanterns cast flickering shadows on the canvas walls. Stannis glanced up as Ned approached, awarding him only the barest nod of acknowledgement. "Lord Stark," he said without preamble. "My scouts bring word that the gold cloaks might be fortifying the main gates. They have seized surplus grain in Flea Bottom and moved it to the Red Keep. As for the Lannisters, Tywin's army is rumored to be in the Riverlands. Possibly he is dealing with uprisings or skirmishes from your son's men. I've had conflicting reports. Some say the young wolf marches. Some say he is still massing near Moat Cailin." Ned frowned. "When I last wrote to my wife, Lady Catelyn, she implied that Robb was readying to defend the Riverlands, not to push too far south until we had word from you. Perhaps these rumors are Lannister attempts at misdirection. Still, Tywin is cunning. If he perceives the threat to King's Landing, he may rush east. We must act swiftly." "Agreed," said Stannis. "If the gold cloaks are strengthening their position, it means Cersei anticipates an attack that might encourage them to shut the gates or even attempt to bar entry to food caravans. The small folk will suffer, but that's what the Lannisters do. Sow fear and chaos." One of Stannis' captains, a bearded knight named Ser Andral, coughed softly. "Lord, if the gold cloaks decide to man the walls in earnest, we'll have a siege. Could take weeks, perhaps months. The city's supply lines might outlast our morale if Tywin arrives with reinforcements." "I won't linger for a siege," Stannis declared, voice flinty. "Not unless forced. King's Landing can be taken quickly if we strike hard and fast. The gold cloaks are many, but they are not an army. Most have only patrolled streets, not fought in pitched battle. If the City Watch sees they have no chance, they may lay down their arms, especially if we can expose Joffrey's parentage more loudly still. But that might require capturing one of the main gates before the city can fully react." Ned stepped closer to the map. Rough sketches showed the walls of King's Landing, the gatehouses, the serpentine streets behind them. His mind recalled the city's layout from the days he spent there as Hand of the King. The Red Keep perched atop Aegon's high hill, the slums of Flea Bottom at the base, the wealthy manors of the west and south edges of the city. "We might attempt to feint at one gate and then strike another," he offered. "But the City Watch is large enough to respond from within the walls. Another possibility is to send a smaller force in by boat, landing near the Mudgate or the Blackwater Bayside, to force the Watch to split. Then we can attack from the land side as well." Stannis gave him a measured look. "A bold plan, but it carries risk. If the smaller force is discovered, they'll be overwhelmed at the docks. Still, we do have ships in the bay. A portion of my fleet has followed us along the coast. They could attempt a landing." Ned hesitated. He was no master of naval attacks. That had been Stannis' purview in the last war, seizing Dragonstone and holding Storm's End under siege. "We cannot win without some measure of risk," Ned conceded quietly. Stannis glanced at the captains gathered, each bearing the posture of men braced for difficult orders. "I will consider the naval assault. If the gold cloaks panic, we'll exploit the confusion. But I want no bungled foray that costs us men unnecessarily." The City Watch are not our true foes. The Lannisters are. Once we hold the city, I will show them mercy if they bend the knee. If they do not, well..." His voice trailed off and he scowled. "We'll see." Ser Andral and the others bowed their heads. Ned studied Stannis' face in the lamp glow and saw only grim determination. There was no warmth there, no flicker of Robert's brash humor or Renly's charm. But if Stannis kept his vow to restore justice, that alone might suffice to rid the realm of Lannister corruption. They spoke a while longer, finalizing the next day's march. Finally, Stannis dismissed his captains, leaving only Ned in the pavilion. The king folded his arms, letting out a slow breath. "Your presence here is no small boon, Lord Stark," he said, voice quieter than usual. "Many men are unsure of me. I know that, but your name carries weight. Even after your flight from the city, people remember how you served as Hand of the King with honesty. They trust that if you stand beside me, I must be in the right." Ned gave a small shake of his head. "I am no politician, Your Grace. I do what I must because the truth should not be buried. Joffrey is not Robert's son, and you are. That is the law." Stannis studied him for a moment. "There was a time I believed men like you to be naive, latching onto honor as if it could shield us from the world. But I see now that it is men like you who hold the realm together when everything else cracks. We will take King's Landing, and the Lannisters will face the King's justice." Ned bowed respectfully and departed. Outside, the night was cold and damp, the wind rustling the rows of tents, extinguishing half the torches. He could see the outline of the ridge behind them and, beyond that, the faint glimmer of the sea. The hush weighed on him. He pulled his cloak tighter and headed toward his own tent, mind turning over Stannis' words. It was good to feel that his presence helped ensure some modicum of justice, but it also meant the burden on his shoulders had grown heavier still. The next day, the rain returned with renewed fury. A morning haze shrouded the fields and forests around them, limiting vision to a few dozen yards. Soldiers were ordered to keep tight formation, lest stragglers wander off into the mist. The pace was agonizingly slow. Men cursed every step in the mud. Wagons sank to their axles in boggy patches, requiring teams of horses to drag them free. Twice, they had to stop and haul out a half-buried cart of supplies. Ned realized with mounting frustration that the weather was on Cersei's side. Each day wasted in the mire gave King's Landing more time to prepare. If Tywin Lannister hurried east, they might face his relief army outside the gates. At midday, as they pressed on through the unrelenting downpour, a horn sounded from the rear of the column. Riders came pounding up, splattering mud as they shouted for the king. Ned, near the front, guided his horse back along the lines until he met the rider. A soaked young scout, cloak torn and face pale with alarm. The lad swallowed, bowing in the saddle to Ned, then to King Stannis, who had galloped up with some of his guards. "My lord," stammered the scout, "we have news from the west. Our outriders discovered a small Lannister party heading toward us. Only 24 men wearing Lannister colors. But they're fleeing from something. The outriders say a force bigger than ours might be chasing them. At least, there are signs of a larger presence. Tracks, remains of a camp." Stannis' brow furrowed. "A larger Lannister presence chasing their own men? That makes no sense. Explain more clearly." The scout wiped rain from his eyes. I'm not entirely sure, Your Grace. The outriders found the Lannister men scattered, as if they'd been ambushed. Some had arrow wounds in the back. Others had their throats cut. A few survivors claimed they were attacked at night by wolves in the darkness. We couldn't get more out of them, like they were half mad with fear. Ned's heartbeat quickened at the word wolves. "Wolves in the darkness?" he repeated, uneasy. "Could it be outlaws? Or men wearing direwolf badges from the north?" Stannis frowned. "Your son's men, perhaps? The young wolf rumored to be in the Riverlands." Ned found his pulse pounding. "I do not know, but it might be. My son, Robb, is called the Young Wolf. If he has reached the Crownlands or even the Stormlands, he could be harassing any Lannister outriders he finds. But the scout said these men had arrow wounds in the back, throats cut. That suggests a skirmish or an ambush. My son is not one for needless cruelty. Stannis's lips thinned. War rarely spares cruelty, Lord Stark. If these men were Lannister outriders, your boy's outriders might have attacked them to gather intelligence or to terrorize them. We cannot be certain, but if your son is near, that might change things. Could he be heading to join us? Or is he marching on the city alone? Ned tried to stay calm, but hope mingled with concern in his chest. If Robb truly was near, they might unify their forces and strike King's Landing with overwhelming strength, or perhaps force the city to surrender without a drawn-out battle. But that would require coordination. We should attempt contact, Ned suggested. Send riders west to see if the men in question truly bear the direwolf banner. If it is my son, we must speak. Agreed, Stannis said brusquely. He turned to his guards. Send a swift party out. Make sure they carry Baratheon colors as well as Stark's. I want to know if we have allies or foes prowling our flank. The riders spurred off, disappearing into the sheets of rain. Stannis's mood darkened further. He ordered the army to halt early that afternoon rather than push on, hoping the weather might break by morning. If Robb Stark's men were truly nearby, contact might come soon. If it was some band of outlaws, that too needed clarifying. Exhausted, wet through, the soldiers set up camp as best they could, constructing shelters from sagging canvas. Smoke from campfires rose in thin plumes, soon dissipated by the relentless drizzle. In the gloom, men ate watery stew and drank from skins of sour ale. They were too tired and demoralized for conversation, for songs, for anything but grim endurance. Ned found meager shelter beneath an oilcloth awning outside his tent, gazing west into the mist where the road vanished. A restlessness gnawed at him. If it was truly Robb, his son had accomplished more than anyone expected, traveling so far south so quickly. That sparked a flicker of pride, though worry immediately followed. The Riverlands were in chaos, House Frye was unpredictable, and Tywin Lannister was a savage foe. How had Robb managed to slip away, or had he scattered the Lannister host at Riverrun? So many questions and no answers. Time felt suspended by the endless rain. Late in the evening, horns sounded from the western edge of camp. Ned rose at once, heart pounding. Lanterns bobbed among the tents, and voices shouted. Men scrambled to arms, half expecting an attack. Ned hurried to the perimeter, hand on the hilt of ice, his great sword sheathed across his back. There, amid the wagons and soldiers with raised spears, he glimpsed a small band of riders entering the camp under a makeshift banner of truce. Their cloaks were soaked, horses dripping mud. As they dismounted, Ned saw a crest upon one rider's breastplate, a gray direwolf on white. The sight made him exhale sharply, relief and astonishment mingling in his chest. The ring of soldiers parted to let them through, and one of the riders pushed back his soaked hood, revealing a young face, tired, grim, but unmistakably that of Robb Stark. He was leaner than before, more angular in the jaw, and wore the hardened expression of a man who had seen battles, but the resemblance to Catelyn and to Ned himself was there. Another rider behind him was Theon Greyjoy, cloak spattered with mud, eyes darting around warily. Beside them, a tall, broad-shouldered man in northern mail carried the Stark banner. "Robb," Ned whispered, stepping forward. The guards around him hesitated, uncertain whether to hold this new arrival at spear point, but Ned motioned them aside. "My son." Robb removed a sodden glove and gripped Ned's forearm in the warrior's greeting. Then, in a rush of emotion, he seized his father in a fierce embrace. Ned felt the tension in Robb's muscles, the faint tremor in the boy's arms. Words failed them both for a moment. The onlooking soldiers shifted uneasily, not used to such a display from a lord and his son on a mist-shrouded battlefield approach. "Father," Robb said at last, voice thick, "I've ridden day and night to find you." Ned pulled back, studying his son's face in the torchlight. Robb looked older, far older than his years. "War did that. Gods be good. You've come so far. Are you well? Is your host near?" Robb nodded. "Yes, I have close to 10,000 men camped a short ride west. We've been hunting stray Lannister parties and scouting the roads. When we learned you and King Stannis marched on the city, we came south in haste. Word reached us that the Imp and the Mountain were terrorizing villages in the Riverlands, but we gave them the slip. He paused, exhaling a ragged breath. When we heard you'd left King's Landing, rumors said you were either dead or imprisoned, but we soon learned you'd fled to Storm's End and united with Stannis. Mother is still in the Riverlands, forging alliances. She told me to do what I must to protect the North, and to help you. Ned felt an overwhelming wave of gratitude. Your men, are they tired? Hungry? They've endured worse, Robb assured him, a faint, tight smile forming. But we're eager for a real fight. Tywin Lannister's men have split. Half remain near Harrenhal, half roam aimlessly. We had a few skirmishes with their outriders, but they won't engage us in open battle. They're waiting for something. Perhaps they're waiting for us to commit to a move on King's Landing. We decided to find you before marching blindly. We would fight by your side, Father, if you'll have us. Ned clasped his son's shoulder. Of course. He glanced around, seeing the ring of soldiers watching. Many were from the Stormlands or from Stannis' personal retinue, men uncertain about these northern arrivals. The king must hear this. Let's go. We'll speak in Stannis' command pavilion. The realm changes tonight. He guided Robb through the camp toward the large tent with the flaming Hart and Stag standard. Theon and the other northern riders followed. Whispers trailed in their wake. The young wolf is here, they said. The North has come. Some men eyed the dire wolf sigils with curiosity or a hint of apprehension, especially those from southern houses who had only heard stories about the fierce northern ways. Others appeared relieved. More soldiers meant a stronger push against King's Landing. Inside the command tent, King Stannis stood by the map table, conferring with a few captains. The damp canvas dripped occasionally from the top, forming small puddles on the ground. Heat from a brazier made the air stuffy and thick. As Ned and Robb entered, the conversation fell silent. Stannis' stern gaze swept over the newcomers, lingering on Robb, on Theon, on the direwolf sigils. Your Grace, Ned said formally, allow me to present my son, Robb Stark, who marches south with 10,000 men from the north and the Riverlands. They have come to join us against the Lannisters. Robb bowed his head, though not too low. He was a king's peer in a sense. King Stannis, my sword is yours, if you'll have it. My father speaks for me in matters of loyalty. The North rises to see justice done upon the Lannisters. Stannis studied the young man, as though measuring his worth. Lord Robb, he said at last, voice cool. Your presence is unexpected, but not unwelcome. I have heard rumors of how you outmaneuvered Jaime Lannister near Riverrun. If you bring men and cause Tywin's host to quake, that is well. You understand, of course, that I am the rightful heir to the Iron Throne, as my brother Robert left no trueborn son. Robb met his gaze. I do, Your Grace. I recognize your claim. Stannis nodded curtly. Then welcome. Let us speak plainly. Do you propose to unite your forces with mine for a single assault on King's Landing? Or do you intend to hold back? I came to fight, Robb said. My men are fresh, prepared to push on. If you plan to strike soon, we'll join. But if you believe we should wait to starve the city or lure Tywin into a trap, I will listen to your counsel, though the North grows weary of letting Lannisters roam free. Stannis folded his arms. I do not intend to wait. The city's gates may be barred, but if we arrive en masse with your 10,000 added to my 12, we have more than 20,000 strong. The gold cloaks are fewer in number, and many might desert once they see the size of our host. Our greatest threat is Tywin's relief army, but if your presence in the field keeps Tywin pinned in the Riverlands, we could strike quickly. King's Landing might be ours within a fortnight. In the corner, Theon Greyjoy cleared his throat. The gold cloaks might hold out. They have scorpions and catapults on the walls. You'll need siege towers to climb them. Stannis gave him a withering look. We have engines of war in the baggage train, though the roads have slowed us. The City Watch is ill-trained in their use, so I doubt they'll man the catapults well. A direct assault remains costly, but if we approach from the north and the sea at once, they'll be overwhelmed. Ned stepped around the table, tracing a route on the map with his finger. Renly leads a small force near Summerhall, pinning a Lannister contingent there. Perhaps we can call upon him to come from the south as well, forming a three-pronged approach. If King's Landing is encircled, it might surrender without a long siege. Stannis' mouth twitched with annoyance at the mention of Renly, but he gave a curt nod. Yes, my brother is performing his duties. I've had no new ravens from him since we parted ways, but if he wins a skirmish against the Lannisters, he could march north. We must trust that he knows his orders. My fervent wish is to avoid scattering our strength. Let's unify and finish this in one blow. Robb regarded the map. I'll bring my men within 2 days. We're camped nearby, and I can have them mobilized at dawn. If you prefer, I can scout around to see if Tywin truly is pinned, or if he means to rush east. Stannis considered. Best not. Every day of delay is another day for the Lannisters to fortify. We move as soon as your men rejoin us. He paused, looking at Ned. Lord Stark, you will help coordinate. With our combined might, we'll have an advantage. Ned nodded gravely, though inside, he felt a surge of relief. They had a real chance at a decisive outcome. A swift blow that could end the Lannisters' grip on the throne. Yes, your grace. I'll see to the details. Stannis lifted his chin. So be it. Lord Robb, we welcome your host. In the morning, my quartermasters will coordinate supplies so your men can have their share of rations. Robb inclined his head in thanks. The captains parted to give him space, and Ned reached out, briefly gripping Robb's shoulder in a silent expression of fatherly pride. Robb gave him a small, almost shy smile, revealing that inside the warrior he had become, there was still a young man who once roamed Winterfell's halls. Ned's heart twisted with both relief and sorrow at all they had been forced to endure. They spent that night catching up around Ned's small brazier, just father and son, and Theon nearby, rummaging for something to eat. Robb spoke of their path through the Riverlands, how they'd freed Riverrun from siege by luring Jaime Lannister into a trap. Ned in turn described the precarious alliance with Renly and the flight from King's Landing that had saved Sansa and Arya. The memory of his daughters brought a pang. They remained behind in Storm's End, presumably safe, though with war, nothing was truly certain. By dawn, Robb and Theon rode back to gather the northern host. Ned watched them depart into the thinning rain, the promise of a break in the weather at last shining through the clouds. Soon, Stannis' entire army was abuzz with preparations. Horses were fed and brushed, armor checked. The baggage train was reorganized, and the men were told to brace themselves for a swift march to King's Landing. If the roads dried even a little, they could be before the city gates in less than a week. On the second day, the Northern Army arrived. The sight of so many direwolf banners was enough to make some men in the Baratheon ranks cheer. They saw these reinforcements as a boon. Others eyed the fierce northern men with caution. But in short order, camp was reorganized, and new lines of tents sprang up like mushrooms on the wet ground. Robb took up a position near the flank, conferring with Stannis' captains about the order of march. Grey Wind, Robb's direwolf, prowled the perimeter, unnerving the southern soldiers unaccustomed to such a beast. Yet no one dared challenge it. That evening, Ned stood upon a small rise overlooking the joined camp. Countless fires flickered in the dusk. Men moved like ants below him, the murmur of thousands of voices blending with the crackle of flames. Seldom had he seen an army this large, certainly not since Robert's rebellion. He felt a deep sense of foreboding. War was always a gambler's throw, no matter how many men you had. If the Gold Cloaks resisted or if Tywin arrived at the last moment, the fields around King's Landing would run red with blood. Ned prayed the City Watch would see reason, that Cersei's hold on the throne was tenuous enough for them to yield. But Joffrey was, by all accounts, a vicious boy, easily manipulated by his mother. They might stand defiant. He turned to see Robb walking up the slope, cloak flapping in the breeze. Grey Wind padded behind him, sniffing the air. Ned patted the beast's side warily. He still remembered the pup it had once been, and marveled at how large and intimidating it had grown. Robb came to stand beside his father. "Your men are settling in well?" Ned asked softly. Robb nodded. "They are. They'll do their duty." He gazed over the camp, eyes reflecting the wavering glow. "Father, do you truly believe King Stannis will be a just ruler? Men say he's harsh, unyielding. Some prefer Renly because he's kinder, others speak of restoring Targaryens. The realm is fracturing. I only want to be sure we're doing the right thing." Ned felt the weight of that question. "I believe Stannis has the best claim under the law. He is unyielding, yes, but also honest in his fashion. The Lannisters must be removed. We cannot let the realm labor under the incestuous rule of Joffrey. Once that is done, perhaps you and I can look to the North's future, away from so much southern intrigue. But for now, this is the path." Robb exhaled. "As you say, father." Then he hesitated. "There's something else. The men talk about you having the chance to end the Lannisters in King's Landing before you fled. That if you had only struck first, none of this bloodshed would be needed. Is that true?" Ned looked down, heart heavy. "Some claim that, but had I stayed, your sisters might have died. War would have erupted anyway. The Lannisters do not yield easily. We can only move forward." Robb put a hand on Ned's shoulder. "Then we'll do it together. For our family. For the North." Ned placed his own hand atop Robb's, a surge of pride welling within him. Yes, together. They remained a while longer, father and son, watching the fires of the army that would march upon King's Landing. In the distance, thunder rumbled, perhaps a last vestige of the storms that had dogged them, or perhaps an omen. They marched at dawn. With the ground slightly firmer, they made better time at last. Columns of men stretched for miles, a tapestry of banners. Baratheon, Stark, and the sigils of numerous storm lords. The king rode near the front with Ned, Robb, and a handful of prominent knights. Scouts fanned out ahead, ensuring no enemy force lurked to ambush them. The main route turned northeast, skirting the Rose Road that led directly to the city. Villages appeared, many abandoned or suspicious of passing armies. Some peasants cowered in hovels, afraid of either side, or displayed tattered flags to show a semblance of loyalty. A few recognized Ned Stark and cheered, or at least didn't flee. The rumor that the Lannisters had no rightful claim seemed to spread faster than a brushfire, turning many small folk against the Boy King. The combined host pressed onward for 3 days, making good speed until they reached the outskirts of the King's Wood, which lay south and east of the capital. Thick trees and twisting trails made for cautious progress. Stannis wanted to avoid the main roads in case they were trapped or scouted by Lannister outriders. Ned suspected Cersei's spies would know of their approach anyway, but perhaps the City Watch would feel less secure if they weren't sure from which direction the army might emerge. On the morning of the 4th day, a scout galloped in, reporting that the city lay just beyond the trees, less than 10 miles away. From a small rise, Ned could see the top of the Red Keep's towers silhouetted against the pale sky, and the city's walls rising from the distance. The smell of the sea drifted on the air, mixed with the faint odor of smoke and sewage from thousands upon thousands of inhabitants. King's Landing, the place he had left under the cover of night, now the object of a marching army. As they pressed closer, the trees thinned. The road forked, one branch leading toward a minor gate known as the Dragon Gate, another curving around to the city's southern perimeter and the King's Gate. Stannis ordered the men to halt and array themselves in a wide clearing. War horns sounded, calling the vanguard into formation. Knights strapped on helmets, crossbowmen wound their strings. The mood was electric, taut with the knowledge that confrontation was imminent. From here on, the City Watch could not fail to see them coming. The only question was whether the defenders would sally forth or remain behind their walls. Stannis convened a final war council. The sun was climbing in the sky, bright on the polished steel of gathered knights. Robb arrived with a small retinue, Theon at his side, while Ned stood by the king. Around them, half a dozen lords and captains formed a circle, the tang of sweat and tension in the air. "We'll split into 3 prongs," Stannis announced. "The main force, under my command, will approach the King's Gate. Lord Stark, you will lead a secondary force around to the Dragon Gate, ensuring they cannot reinforce from that side. Lord Robb, you and your Northerners will remain in reserve behind me, ready to exploit any breach or repel a sally. Our archers will keep the ramparts busy. Once we are at the gates, we give the City Watch a chance to yield. If they refuse, we break down the gates with rams and storm inside. Meanwhile, a portion of my ships will attempt a landing near the Mud Gate to sow confusion. Any questions?" Robb glanced at Ned. Ned felt uneasy. Storming a well-defended gate was costly. He recalled Robert once saying, "Better to break a gate than to starve your men in a siege." But that had been Robert's brand of boldness. Still, it might work if the watch was divided or if morale was low. "No questions, Your Grace," Ned finally said. "We'll follow your orders." Stannis nodded sharply. "Then to arms. May the gods, whichever gods you favor, grant us victory." A half-hour later, the host advanced. Ned took command of a portion of the cavalry and foot, nearly 5,000 men in total, to swing wide and approach the Dragon Gate from an angle. The ground was more open here, with farmland and scattered trees. In the distance, across a broad field, Ned could see the high curtain walls of King's Landing rising, dotted with watchtowers. Tiny figures moved along the battlements. A horn call echoed from within the city. Someone had spotted them. As they drew closer, banners snapping in the breeze, Ned spied the shapes of scorpions or catapults on the walls. The gold cloak's colors fluttered. Gold and black, reminiscent of the old Baratheon sigil, but twisted by Lannister loyalty. His stomach twisted. War was truly upon them. At his side, Northern Knights wore grim expressions. He glanced toward a standard-bearer carrying the direwolf banner. No matter how many times Ned saw it in the field, it still jolted him. He had not wanted this, any of it, but there was no path left except forward. They halted beyond bowshot range, forming ranks. A line of foot soldiers with shields, behind them archers, behind them cavalry. Ned could see, far to the south, the main body of Stannis' forces approaching the King's Gate. Smoke drifted from the city's chimneys. People might be barricaded in their homes, or else crowding the walls to watch events unfold. At the gate towers, the gold cloaks mustered. Ned turned to his own men. "Shields up," he said calmly. "Archers, notch arrows. We wait for Stannis' signal. If they do not yield, we advance." Moments later, from the King's Gate area, a horn blast rang out. Ned tensed. He heard faint shouting, some challenge or ultimatum from Stannis' herald, presumably. Then another horn, long and low. No sign of the gates opening. The city had refused to yield. The choice was made. Ned raised his sword. "Archers, loose," he commanded. A volley of arrows arced through the sky, dark shapes whistling across the open field to clatter against the city walls. Most struck stone, but some soared over and disappeared inside. He heard shouts of alarm from the battlements. A return volley came from the gold cloaks atop the walls. Ned's men raised shields. Arrows thudded among them, piercing a few unlucky souls. A soldier near Ned went down with a bolt through his shoulder, crying out. Others closed ranks, stepping over him. Ned's heart hardened. This was battle. He spurred his horse forward a few paces, scanning the battlements for signs of leadership. He saw men in gold cloaks loading crossbows, a few in plate with Lannister sigils. Not many. That might be their weakness. Another horn blast from the south signaled that Stannis' men were assaulting the King's Gate. Ned shouted for the rams to come forward. A pair of large, wheeled battering rams, covered by wooden mantlets, rolled across the muddy ground, pushed by a combination of foot soldiers and draft animals. Arrows rained down on them, but the mantlets offered partial cover. The men inside the rams advanced doggedly. Ned kept archers firing in waves, forcing the defenders to duck behind the parapets. One ram reached the gate. Despite the hail of arrows, the soldiers inside began pounding on the thick wood. Each impact sent a dull thud echoing across the field. Ned could see cracks starting to form after several minutes. The gold cloaks on the walls tried to drop stones or boiling oil, but the mantlets blocked some, and the archers picked off those who leaned too far. The second ram joined the first, accelerating the process. Ned felt a surge of hope. The gate might not be as well reinforced as in earlier days. Perhaps the city watch had grown complacent under Joffrey's reign. Then, a sudden whoosh. A flaming arrow soared overhead and struck the top of the mantlet. One more followed. The gold cloaks had found pitch or oil. Flames began licking at the wooden covering. Soldiers shouted within the ram structure, frantic. Some leapt out, rolling on the ground to douse sparks on their cloaks. Others kept pushing. Ned cursed, signaling for a wave of crossbow bolts aimed at the defenders above. They needed to keep them from launching more fire. Smoke rose from the rams, but the repeated impacts continued. At last, a splintering crack resounded. The gate shuddered. With a final heave, the rams broke through. The heavy wooden doors swung inward, though there was still a portcullis behind them. Soldiers rushed forward with axes, hacking at the iron lattice. Arrows and boiling liquid rained down. Screams mingled with the clash of steel. Ned signaled for more men to surge in, covering each other with shields. If they could raise the portcullis or break through, a wedge of swordsmen could spill into the city and seize control of the gatehouse. Ned spurred his horse closer, watching from behind the shield wall. He glimpsed the gold cloaks frantically trying to hold the breach. Some wore decent armor, others simple leather. The defenders pressed downward with spears through the bars of the portcullis. But a mass of Stormland and northern soldiers now battered at the iron. Gradually, with a shriek of metal, the portcullis bent upward. Men poured into the gap, ducking and thrusting swords. Blood sprayed across the muddy ground. The defenders reeled backward. A horn blast, this one from inside the city. Ned realized they had gained a foothold. He shouted, "Forward! Follow them in!" The men roared and surged beneath the battered gate, filling the gatehouse corridors with the clang of swords and screams of the wounded. Ned kicked his horse, riding in behind them as they established a perimeter inside the walls. The city's outer streets yawned before him, strewn with debris and abandoned market stalls. In the distance, he heard more fighting near the King's Gate. High above, the gold cloaks still manned the walls, uncertain whether to keep shooting or flee. Some threw down their bows in surrender. Others tried to hold vantage points, but the men inside now had the advantage. Arrows from the ground forced them to duck behind crenellations. Step by step, Ned's forces pushed into the city, clearing pockets of resistance. He called for discipline, for them not to harm unarmed townsfolk. Some tried to hide in doorways or behind crates. Others ran screaming. The ring of steel was incessant. Ned found himself in the thick of it as they advanced up the street, flanked by a squad of northern soldiers. Twice, a cluster of gold cloaks tried to bar their way with pikes, but the press of numbers overwhelmed them. Ned parried a thrust from a frantic watchman, slamming him aside with the flat of his blade. Another watchman stumbled to his knees, helmet askew, begging for mercy. Ned spared him, barking for his men to bind the prisoner. There was no need for slaughter if these men would yield. A new horn sounded from deeper in the city, a different pitch alarm likely. The city watch was disorganized, men turning on their officers or fleeing for the Red Keep. Ned glimpsed chaos all around. Doors slammed, shutters locked, people screamed about invaders. The air reeked of smoke, as if a building nearby was aflame. His men pressed onward toward a broader avenue that led to the city center. Suddenly, a group of horsemen galloped into view from a side street. Ned tensed, raising his sword, but the rider at their head waved a banner of the crowned stag and hart. Baratheon men. They reined up near Ned, the leader pulling off his helmet to reveal a lined face. "My Lord Stark!" The man shouted over the din. "King Stannis has taken the King's Gate. He's fighting near the Mud Gate as well. Some gold cloaks are resisting. Orders are to secure your portion of the city and converge on the Red Keep. The watch is in disarray. The small folk are panicking." Ned nodded. "We'll do just that." Tell his grace we move for Aegon's high hill, but we'll keep watch for any pockets of Lannister guards." The horseman saluted and galloped away with his men. Ned relayed orders to his sub-commanders. Swordsmen fanned out, clearing the side alleys, driving gold cloaks to surrender or flee. Archers kept an eye on the rooftops. Step by bloody step they advanced. At times, a crossbow bolt would zip by, felling a soldier, or they would find a barricade of overturned wagons manned by a desperate sergeant of the watch. But each time, the defenders melted away once they realized they were heavily outnumbered. Soon, Ned and a group of about 100 men found themselves approaching the Street of Steel, known for its smithies and forges. Here, he recognized certain shops from his time as Hand. The street was nearly deserted, with the windows shuttered. Smoke billowed from a half-collapsed roof further down. A cluster of gold cloaks ran at the sight of Ned's forces, discarding cloaks and weapons to blend in with the populace. Ned let them go. Better they run than fight a pointless battle. They pressed on, aiming for the hill leading to the Red Keep. The city seemed half empty, as if many had fled or barricaded themselves. Occasionally, a civilian would call out for mercy or assistance. Ned's men tried not to antagonize them. He prayed that most of the small folk would remain safe indoors until the dust settled. This city had seen enough suffering. At last, they emerged onto a wide thoroughfare that sloped upward. High above loomed the Red Keep's walls. Ned paused, raising a hand to halt the column. Heavy fighting was visible ahead. Baratheon men swarmed the approach, while gold cloaks fired from the walls. Siege ladders were being pushed forward, though the main gate to the Red Keep itself was closed. Archers on the battlements rained arrows down. A group of Lannister guards, identifiable by their lions, guarded the gates. Ned saw a few men in the distinctive crimson cloaks of the Kingsguard. A swirl of panic and adrenaline seized him. The final confrontation was at hand. "Form ranks," Ned bellowed. "Push up to support the Baratheon men." The northern soldiers obeyed, moving in disciplined lines. Some carried hooked poles that could topple ladders from the walls. Others carried crossbows or shortbows. They advanced, joining the fray. The approach to the Red Keep was steep, the cobblestones slick with blood. Bodies littered the road, some wearing gold cloaks, some carrying the stag banner. The stench was overpowering. Shouts and clangs echoed off the high stone walls. Arrows whizzed overhead. Ned spotted a group of men he recognized from Storm's End, pinned behind an overturned wagon. He led his squad to reinforce them, driving off a small unit of lion-helmed knights. In the swirl of chaos, Ned glimpsed a tall, broad form in black plate, clearly one of the Kingsguard. The man's white cloak was spattered with gore. He fought with a savage grace, cutting down 2 Baratheon soldiers who dared approach. Ned's heart chilled. That might be the Hound, Sandor Clegane, or perhaps the Kingsguard Meryn Trant. He wasn't certain from a distance, but either was deadly. He spurred his horse forward, but the crush of men made it hard to ride. He dismounted to direct the infantry more effectively. "Break that shield wall," he yelled, pointing to a cluster of Lannister spears near the gate. His men roared and surged. Swords rang on shields. Ned advanced behind them, ice in hand, parrying a spear thrust. The Lannister soldier staggered from the impact, and Ned struck him in the helm with the pommel. The man collapsed. Another came at Ned from the side, but a northern footman cut him down with an axe. Step by brutal step, they forced the Lannister line back. Archers overhead continued peppering them with arrows, but it was disorganized. Ned felt the heat of the sun overhead, the sweat dripping down his brow. His arms ached from the weight of ice. More men poured in from the city behind them. He realized that the gold cloaks in other districts must have yielded or deserted, leaving only the diehards near the Red Keep. The battle had turned. A distant trumpet call signaled that Stannis' main forces were converging from the other side of the Red Keep. This was it, the final push. If they took these gates, the fortress and the entire city would be under their control. Ned summoned fresh squads to surge forward with a battering ram, though it was smaller than the ones they used at the gates. The defenders poured oil from above, but crossbow bolts drove them back. In the swirl, Ned saw a figure in gleaming gold armor stride through the gate's interior, a tall man with long hair the color of beaten gold. Jaime Lannister? Ned's pulse hammered. The Kingslayer was here, sword in hand, shouting commands to the men inside. A volley of Baratheon arrows hissed in, forcing him to duck behind a shield. Ned's memory flashed to the last time he had faced Jaime in the streets. A lifetime ago, it seemed. He had no desire for a personal duel, not with so many men fighting. Yet if Jaime engaged them directly, that could become inevitable. Ned advanced, urging the ram forward. The gate was battered, splintered. Inside, the Lannisters attempted to brace it with beams. The ramming team slammed again. Each impact jarred the senses. More oil rained from above, but archers kept the walls from being fully manned. Ned coughed in the thick smoke as bits of flame clung to the ram's covering. Men behind him yelled in agony if they were hit by burning oil. He ground his teeth, pressing on. The timbers cracked. At last, with a resounding crash, the inner gate gave way, toppling the makeshift barrier. A wave of Baratheon and Stark soldiers surged into the Red Keep's courtyard. The Lannister guards fell back, some forming a ring around Jaime, others scattering. Ned shouted for them to press in, but also for them to allow any watchman who threw down arms to surrender. The fighting was fierce. Here were the best-trained men, the last line of defense. A knight with a lion helm lunged at Ned, blade biting into Ned's side, scraping against his steel cuirass. Ned grunted in pain but managed a retaliatory slash that tore open the knight's arm. The man fell, shrieking. Then a hush seemed to fall on Ned's awareness, as he saw Jaime Lannister spinning in the courtyard, sword flickering in the sun, cutting down a Baratheon soldier who ventured too close. The Kingslayer's golden hair was loose, his jaw set in a savage grin. Two of Ned's northern men rushed him from behind, but Jaime whirled, parrying both. In 3 deft moves, he slashed one across the throat and the other across the thigh. Ned's soldiers collapsed. Jaime then locked eyes with Ned across the courtyard. Ned's stomach clenched. Their last confrontation had ended abruptly when Ned's leg was stabbed by one of Jaime's men. Now, with war swirling around them, the moment had come again. Jaime pointed his sword. "Stark," he spat, stepping over the body of a downed watchman. "You survived after all. I should have guessed." Ned advanced warily, gripping ice. He was no longer as young or spry as he had been, but a sense of determination steadied him. "It ends here, Lannister. The boy on the throne has no claim. Lay down your arms and let there be no more bloodshed." Jaime laughed, a harsh sound. "And let your usurper put my sister's children to the sword? I think not." He lashed out at a Baratheon man-at-arms who charged, driving his blade through the man's chest. The soldier collapsed with a gasping cry. Jaime kicked him off the blade. "Come, Stark. Let's see if you can best me without your leg giving out." Ned set his jaw. He saw the ring of fighting men around them, realized that no one would intervene in time. Jaime Lannister was lethal, yet the realm's fate, at least in part, might hinge on Ned standing firm. He steadied his breathing, remembering Ser Roderick's lessons and all the years he had honed his sword arm. "So be it," he said. They closed the distance, Jaime swinging first. Ned blocked with ice, the shock traveling up his arms. Jaime pressed, swirling his blade in cunning arcs. Ned recognized the skill, the fluid footwork, yet he managed to parry and pivot. A ring of steel on steel echoed through the courtyard. Shouts from the surrounding battle blurred. Jaime feinted left, then sliced toward Ned's ribs. Ned twisted, deflecting just in time, though the tip grazed his armor. He countered with an overhead chop, forcing Jaime to dodge. Jaime smirked, stepping lightly. "You fight better than last time, Stark. Or perhaps your men can't stab you in the leg again." Ned said nothing, focusing on the rhythm. Jaime lunged, and Ned sidestepped, slashing at Jaime's shoulder. Jaime parried, eyes bright with adrenaline. They circled each other, footwork stirring up dust. A fallen soldier groaned nearby. The courtyard was in chaos, but Ned and Jaime seemed to occupy a pocket of savage calm, each testing the other's guard. Jaime pressed again, striking thrice in quick succession, lightning fast. Ned blocked too. The third nicked his upper arm, slicing through the mail. Pain flared, but he gritted his teeth. He retreated a step, then shifted ice to a different angle, surprising Jaime with a thrust that grazed the Kingslayer's hip. Jaime cursed, stumbling half a step. Ned saw an opening, but Jaime recovered too quickly, slamming Ned's blade aside and forcing a reset. They broke apart, breathing heavily. Around them, Baratheon and Stark forces had overrun much of the courtyard. The Lannisters near the gate were surrendering or dying. Ned saw glimpses of men fleeing into the keep proper. Fire licked at a portion of the stables. Archers had claimed the walls. The Red Keep was falling. Yet Jaime fought on, refusing to concede. Sweat ran into Ned's eyes. He blinked it away. Jaime lunged again, faster than expected. Ned deflected, but Jaime locked their blades, leaning in. Their faces were inches apart. Ned smelled the sweat and blood on the Kingslayer, saw the fury in his green eyes. Jaime gritted his teeth, forcing Ned's sword arm back with raw power. Ned felt his muscles strain. Jaime was strong as well as skilled. Then Ned brought up his knee, slamming it into Jaime's thigh. The blow jarred the Kingslayer, giving Ned space to wrench himself free and pivot for a diagonal cut. Jaime twisted away, but the tip of ice caught his golden armor, scraping across the breastplate. Jaime cursed, stumbling. Ned pressed the advantage, forcing him back with heavy swings. Jaime blocked one, two, the third hammered his sword aside, leaving him open. Ned drew back for a finishing blow. Before he could strike, a Lannister man-at-arms rushed in from the side, desperate to protect Jaime. Ned had no time to turn. He saw movement in the corner of his eye. The man's spear thrust for Ned's ribs. Instinct saved him. He half-turned, so the spear's point caught his side at a glancing angle, piercing his armor but not deeply. Still, the force threw Ned off balance. Jaime roared and slashed at Ned's midsection. Ned tried to twist but felt a searing slash across his torso. He stumbled, pain blinding him. The world reeled. A northern soldier leapt onto the Lannister man-at-arms, driving him to the ground. Jaime raised his sword for another strike, but Ned recovered enough to parry, though weakly. The clash numbed his arms. Ned felt blood trickling beneath his armor. Fear pulsed in his veins. He was wounded, and Jaime was still lethal. Yet he refused to yield. Summoning his last reserves, he feinted high. Jaime took the bait, raising his blade to parry. Ned instantly dropped low and swept ice across Jaime's thighs. Jaime, half-turned, could not block in time. The Valyrian steel bit deeply, toppling him with a shout. Jaime crashed to the ground, sword clattering from his grip. Ned wavered, inhaling sharply, half expecting another attacker. But the courtyard was ringed with Northern and Baratheon soldiers now, controlling the space. Jaime lay there, blood pooling around his legs, eyes wide with pain and fury. Ned leveled ice at his chest. "Yield," Ned rasped, chest heaving, side burning. "It's done." Jaime snarled in agony, trying to raise himself on an elbow. He glared at Ned with hate and desperation. For a moment, Ned thought he might lunge again, unarmed as he was. Then Jaime coughed, wincing. His voice was raw. "You think you've won? My father will never." "Your father is not here," Ned said. "Yield or die." Jaime's eyes flicked around, seeing the ring of spears and swords pointed his way. He coughed again, blood on his lip. At last, he let his head fall back, the tension draining from him. "I yield," he muttered, voice trembling with pain. A soldier stepped forward to kick Jaime's sword away. Another took up position near Ned, ready to assist if Jaime tried any last treachery. Ned staggered, pressing a hand to his side. Blood stained his surcoat. The pain was harsh, but not mortal, he hoped. He looked around, chest tight. The courtyard was theirs. The red banners with gold lions had been torn down. Pockets of Lannister men either lay dead or were being subdued. Cheers rose as more of Stannis's men arrived, bearing the stag banner. Robb appeared too, pushing through the throng, sword drawn, eyes wide. "Father!" Robb exclaimed, seeing Ned's wounds. He quickly supported him. "7 hells, you're hurt." Ned managed a nod, breathing hard. "I'll live." He looked at Jaime, who was being forcibly bound by a group of soldiers. The Kingslayer glared, teeth clenched. Ned felt no triumph, only weariness. "Have him treated for his wounds," he told his men. "He's a prisoner of the king now." Robb shouted for a healer. Soldiers parted respectfully, letting them pass. A wave of relief and dread churned inside Ned as he realized that Joffrey, Cersei, and the rest of the court might still be inside the Red Keep. The battle was not quite finished, but this courtyard was a major step. The fortress was effectively taken. The city, from the sounds of it, was largely in Stannis's hands. Not far away, Stannis himself rode in through the shattered gate, helmet removed, face grim. He surveyed the scene, eyes lingering on Jaime's bound form. "Lord Stark," he called, voice echoing. "You are wounded?" Ned coughed, wincing. "A scratch, your grace. We have the courtyard. Jaime Lannister is captured." Stannis dismounted, stepping among the bodies. "Good. Where is the queen and her bastard son?" Ned swallowed. "Likely deeper in the keep, or they've fled. We should secure the Great Hall and the royal apartments." Stannis turned to his knights. "Half of you, with me, will storm the interior. The rest will remain here and hold the gates. Let no one escape." He looked back at Ned. "You've done well, my lord, but see to your wounds. Leave the final measure to me." Ned closed his eyes, exhaustion rolling over him. There was a time he would have insisted on seeing it through, but the pain in his side reminded him he was no longer invincible. "As you command, your grace." Robb helped him to a bench, and a soldier brought a strip of cloth for a makeshift bandage. Within the hour, the Red Keep fell completely. Stannis's knights broke into the Great Hall, where they found scattered courtiers, trembling servants, and a few Lannister loyalists who gave token resistance. Joffrey was nowhere in sight, nor was Cersei. Someone said the Kingsguard had escorted them to Maegor's Holdfast, an inner fortress within the keep. That area too was assaulted by Stannis's forces. The news eventually came. The gates of Maegor's Holdfast had been forced, but the queen and her children were missing. Some said they had fled through secret tunnels. Others claimed they were locked in a hidden panic room. When word of that reached Ned, he felt dread coil in his gut. If Cersei and Joffrey escaped the castle, they might regroup with Tywin, continuing the war. But the city was sealed, wasn't it? Could they have fled by sea? Possibly. But with the royal fleet controlled by Stannis's men, that seemed unlikely. He only hoped they would soon be found. That afternoon, as the sun dipped, King Stannis proclaimed victory. The Lannisters were routed. Many gold cloaks had turned cloaks indeed and bent the knee to the new king. Shouts of triumph resounded in the streets, mingling with the wails of the wounded. The realm had changed hands, though the final shape of peace was yet to be decided. Ned, seated on a stone bench in the courtyard, his wound freshly bandaged, watched as a file of battered Lannister men were marched past. The sense of finality felt strange. War was far from over, but the Iron Throne was no longer in Lannister grasp. An older knight in Stark colors approached, bowing. "My lord, we found the body of Lord Varys the Spider near one of the corridors. Seems he was killed in the chaos. No sign of who did it." Ned nodded, regret flickering. Varys had always been secretive, sometimes helpful. He had tried to warn Ned once. Now he was another casualty. "Thank you, sir. See that he's buried properly." The knight left. Robb approached, relief in his eyes. "I've told the men to hold their positions. The city is ours, but looters must be kept in check. Father, you should rest. A real rest. King Stannis can handle the finishing touches." "I will," Ned said wearily. "Just ensure the small folk are spared needless brutality. They've done nothing to deserve more suffering." Robb nodded. "I will." The small folk greeted our men with cheers in some quarters, relieved to be free of Lannister rule. The corners of Ned's mouth tugged upward slightly. If the city saw them as liberators, that might help ease tensions. He closed his eyes, letting the day's chaos settle. So many dead, so much blood. But a false king had been unseated. Perhaps a measure of justice had finally been served. Near nightfall, a group of Baratheon guards arrived with a prisoner in chains, none other than Sandor Clegane, the Hound. He had apparently surrendered once the Lannister cause proved lost, claiming no loyalty to the Boy King anymore. Ned had him taken to the dungeons. Tyrion Lannister was nowhere to be found, rumored to be with Tywin's host. The biggest question remained: where was Joffrey Baratheon? King Stannis addressed that issue in the Great Hall. Now that the dust had settled, a crowd of lords, knights, and commanders gathered, torches cast flickering light on the high ceiling. The hall still bore the iron throne at the far end, looming ominously. Bloodstains marred the floor. Stannis stood at the foot of the throne's dais, wearing battered armor, hair plastered to his head from sweat and grime. Ned, Robb, and various others formed a semicircle around him. Stannis's voice carried, cold and clear. "We have taken King's Landing. The false King Joffrey is rumored to have fled, but he will not escape for long. The City Watch and any loyal citizens who know of his hiding place must come forward. As for the realm, I declare myself King Stannis Baratheon, first of my name, rightful heir to Robert. The boy who called himself Joffrey Baratheon is an abomination. Any man who harbors him or his mother is a traitor to the crown." A hush fell. Then one of Stannis's captains bowed. "Your Grace, we will search every corner of the city. If they still remain here, we will find them." Stannis nodded. His stern gaze fell upon Ned. "Lord Stark, you have shed blood for this cause. You are wounded, yet you stand here still. I name you Hand of the King. As you once served my brother Robert, so shall you serve me if you will. Let all men witness it." Ned froze. His earlier experiences as Hand had led him to heartbreak and near death. Yet refusing might offend Stannis. He glanced at Robb, who looked both proud and concerned. Finally, Ned inclined his head. "I will serve, Your Grace, for the sake of the realm, and to ensure justice is done." Stannis acknowledged that with a tight nod. "Then kneel." Ned bowed stiffly, ignoring the pain in his side, as Stannis removed a short sword from a knight's scabbard. In the hushed hall, he tapped Ned's shoulder. "Eddard Stark, I name you Hand of the King. Rise and take your place at my side." Ned rose, feeling a deep swirl of duty and dread. He saw Robb and the others watching solemnly. This was the realm's new order, Stannis on the throne, Ned as Hand. How it would shape the future, Ned could not say, but he knew there was no turning back. The battles had been fought, the city taken, and the Lannisters dethroned. For better or worse, Ned Stark lived still, bound by the decisions he had made. He thought of his daughters in Storm's End, of Sansa's heartbreak, Arya's restless spirit. He thought of Catelyn in the Riverlands, working to secure alliances. Winterfell seemed an entire world away, a place of peace now overshadowed by war's storm. As the ceremony concluded, a fresh wave of shouts came from outside the hall. The great doors swung open, revealing a group of soldiers dragging in a prisoner. A young man with matted golden hair in torn royal finery. Joffrey. His face was smeared with dirt and tears, eyes wild with terror. A hush rippled through the crowd. Stannis's knights forced Joffrey forward, shoving him to his knees. The Boy King's voice rose in indignation. "Unhand me! I am the king!" Stannis's eyes blazed. "You are no king." He strode forward, cape rustling. "Where is your mother?" Joffrey spat. "I'll never tell you. My grandfather will have your head. All of you, the Lannisters." Stannis backhanded him, cutting off his tirade. Joffrey's lips split and he whimpered. "You are a bastard, born of incest, and have no right to rule. Guards, take him to the dungeon. He will stand trial for the murder of my brother Robert's lineage and for the usurpation of the crown." If he is indeed a child, we shall see how the law deems fit. But let none call him a rightful Baratheon." Joffrey struggled and screamed curses as the guards dragged him away. The hall murmured, men shifting with uneasy excitement. Ned watched chest tight. The boy was vile in his behavior, cruel in his reign, but he was still just a boy. What a tragedy this realm had become, that children faced such horrors. Yet the truth was the truth, and justice demanded some reckoning. Stannis turned back to the crowd. "We have our bastard captive. The queen remains at large, and so do the rest of the Lannisters loyal to her. Our work is not done, but the city is ours, the throne reclaimed. This is the beginning of a new age of law and order. Let none doubt it." Cheers broke out, though some lords watched with guarded expressions. Ned closed his eyes for a moment, letting the noise wash over him. He had done what he had to do, and he had survived. If the gods were good, the realm would heal. Yet he sensed more storms on the horizon. Tywin Lannister, Cersei, and perhaps even other powers stirring. That was for tomorrow. Tonight, they had wrested King's Landing from the jaws of incest and deceit, and Ned Stark stood alive, battered but unbroken. He silently thanked whatever fate had guided him, knowing that this moment, this fragile piece, would shape everything that came after. He opened his eyes to find Robb standing beside him, a ghost of a smile on the boy's weary face. They embraced in the flickering torchlight of the great hall, father and son reunited, the realm changing at their feet. For the first time in many moons, Ned allowed himself a sliver of hope.